Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our discussion today on catalyzing clean air in India, enabling cleaner and greener India. Ladies and gentlemen, this is part of Mobility Outlook's association with Corning that started last year with the intent to create a unique series on innovations in clean air technologies, featuring dialogues and discussions with experts from Corning Incorporated as well as the industry. We're just 2 days away from observing Environment Day, and it is only pertinent that we have gathered today to discuss ways and means to make India cleaner and greener. It must be noted that for World Environment Day 2022, the theme is hashtag only one earth. This incidentally was used at the first global environment gathering in 1972 and is being revived. Our partner for the series, Corning, as you would all know, is one of the world's leading innovators in material science with a 169-year track record of life-changing inventions. Corning is committed to researching, developing, and engineering environmental products that improve the quality of the air we breathe. The company creates ceramic substrates and particulate filters that form the core of world-class pollution control systems, from light-duty passenger cars to heavy-duty trucks and construction equipment. On December 17, 2021, we had our first dialogue with Dr. Willard A. Cutler, Division Vice President and Commercial Director at Corning Environmental Technologies. Commenting on the transformation in the mobility ecosystem from ICEs to EVs and other alternate and greener propulsion technologies, Dr. Cutler had said there are a number of challenges to get from where we are today to where we would like to be in the future. India, he said, is quite fortunate in that most of the technology needed to meet both current regulations and future regulations has already been invented, because regulations typically cascade from Europe to other parts of the world. In the second session in February, we had Dr. Amit, Director for Emerging Technologies at Corning, on global trends and regulations in clean air technologies. The theme across the world is to ensure vehicles emit the same on the road as they do at test laboratories. And to reduce the non-conformity factor, it is necessary to have good instrumentation to measure on-road and developing technologies to meet these requirements. Besides, it is necessary to ensure that the lab test cycles represent real driving, Dr. Joshi had said. In the third session on emissions, air quality, and health, why you should care, we had the honor of hosting Dr. Thorsten Porter, Commercial Technology Director for Light Duty Products at Corning Environmental Technologies, Dr. Mukesh Sharma, Fellow, National Academy of Engineering and member WHO Advisory Group on Air Pollution UN Sustainable Goals, and Professor of Civil Engineering at the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, and Mr. Sudeep Basu, Executive Director at the Emission Controls Manufacturers Association, ECMA. Dr. Sharma called pollution caused by vehicles a serious threat, despite the amount being less, because the chemical composition of pollution from automobiles is very toxic. If you lay the mass into toxicity, you will have a lifetime incremental risk associated with the pollution caused by vehicles. Even CNG causes pollution, he had said. Dr. Porter, meanwhile, complimented India for making significant strides by skipping BS5 for BS6 and said the world, including India, needs to consider temperatures below zero to test emissions. Fuels available at different pumps, as per Dr. Borja, should also be brought into the ambit of emission testing. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we have the absolute pleasure of having with us Mr. K.K. Gandhi, Convener, Center for Automotive Research, Ms. Pamela Tikku, now the officiating director at the International Center for Automotive Technology, and Mr. Sudhir Pillai, Managing Director at Corning India. Today's discussion, we shall start with the first observations, Pillai, followed by a discussion on the subject we have lined up today, which is catalyzing clean air in India, enabling cleaner and greener India. At this stage, ladies and gentlemen, I would also like to remind all of you that you have an opportunity to interact with our speakers today. So do send in your questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens, so I can pick them up towards the end of our session today. I would like to now start and invite Mr. Pillai for his first observations on the subject that we're discussing today. Over to you, Mr. Pillai.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dipanshu, for giving me the opportunity to be part of this panel, and very honored to be along with Mr. Gandhi and Ms. Tiku. They are the experts in this field. So air pollution is a subject which is very close to me, and since 2016, I've been trying to figure out solutions to fight this global pandemic. A global pandemic which is attacking our breath, health, and undermining our general well-being. Just imagine, breathing air of our streets, of our buildings, has now become a public health hazard. And it is actually why WHO announced air pollution as the world's #1 preventable health risk. To put that in context, air pollution is now more dangerous than lack of exercise, obesity, and blood pressure, and tobacco itself. Think about this for a second. Breathing is killing more people than smoking itself. And when is the last time we saw that a big billboard or a label saying that breathing kills? But it's still killing 1.6 million people every year in India, and which is very counterintuitive. And let me explain why I think it's very counterintuitive. The future of mankind has been always very bright since at least the last 2.5 centuries, since the Industrial Revolution. We have wiped out many diseases from the face of this earth, thanks to antibiotics. Water is a challenge, but thanks to the water system, sanitation programs, water is not a big challenge like it was a few centuries back, a couple of centuries back. Food is a challenge, but still we have Green Revolution has put food on billions of tables. But if the other one basic need, which is air, that's been deteriorating for the last many years, and especially in India. So that's the reason I say that it's very counterintuitive. And as mankind, we have been so successful in solving problems. Just imagine 2.5 years back, or 2020 March, we all were stuck with COVID. Within just 1 year, the scientists, the experts came together across the globe, exchanged notes, and in a year's time, we were ready with a vaccine to settle or solve that big problem, a problem which we had never encountered before. The people who were researching or developing the vaccines had never worked upon those kind of virus. So there was a big problem. We created solution in 1 year, and here's a global pandemic which is killing 1.6 million people every year, 3 times more than what it has killed in the last 2.5 years in India itself. And that's something that keeps me awake, and that's something that I would like this panel to discuss today and bring other thoughts to the table. Over to you, Dipanshu.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pillai, for your initial observations on this, and also, the way beautifully how you brought about how the pandemic has sort of, impacted lives world over. Now I'd like to invite Ms. Tiku for a presentation on, while highlighting the aspect of today's discussion. Ms. Tiku, please share your screen.
Give me a moment, please.
Sure.
So is it visible?
It is visible. Yes, please, you may continue.
Thank you, Dipanshu, for inviting me on this panel discussion on catalyzing clean air in India. And the topic is enabling cleaner and greener India regulatory perspective from ICAT on this on the topic which is of interest globally. Sudhir has very rightly set the tone of this panel, saying that breathing is killing, and in not so many minced word has he said that yeah, it is a global catastrophe. It's a pandemic, global pandemic, which is killing people slowly. And we can see that happening, whether we realize it or not, the kind of health issues that are, emerging, the kind of uh, cancer spread is happening, the kind of lung issues are happening in India, is indicative of something which we are all trying to, not take any cognizance. But definitely, it has much, much bigger impact, not for now, but for future also. Having said so, I would like to stick to my mandate on giving you perspective with respect to automotive technologies, how the automotive industry has tried to address cleaning the air. Although automotive industry is blamed for one of the major contributors to the pollution, but it's very important to understand that mobility is key to development. So if we have mobility, it leads to development. We have to move people, we have to move goods, and hence, I'm not saying that this is an escape for not owning the responsibility, but we have to understand that we have to strike a right balance between what is right and how to address it. ICAT stands for International Center for Automotive Technology. I would like to briefly explain what we do. We do testing, validation, design, and homologation. We were established in 2006 and we are located in Manesar. We are over 530 people. We have two centers, so Center 1 and Center 2. Um, in terms of the global scenario of regulations, automotive regulations, this chart explains what kind of regulatory framework do the countries have. So you can see that only developed countries have progressed and adapted stringent emission regulations to control tailpipe emissions for different class of vehicles. There is very large area of countries where the emission regulations is still not implemented in a big way. But in terms of developed countries, you can see that Europe, India, Brazil, US, Korea, China are almost at a similar level of emission regulation regime. So that is, and these are the major markets of the automotive industry. Majority of the sales were there for the automobiles is in these countries, although the developing countries are becoming the new markets for the automotive industry. This is also gives you an evolution of emission regulations in different economies. For example, in Europe, uh, although before 2012 it was Euro 4, but they adapted Euro 5B in 2012, Euro 6B in 2014-15, and it has gone to Euro 6D, and now it was a temporary because the CF values of the our on-road emissions were not defined, and it was defined in 2019, and currently there is Euro 60 and they are planning to go Euro 7 beyond 2025. Similar is the case with US also. You can see the evolution of emission regulations. In China, they are also catching up fast. They are currently at China 6A and they are going to 6B very soon. And they also have adapted very stringent regulations and they have adapted the regulations quite pretty fast. In Japan, they are almost at par with Europe. So in terms of, but certain regulations have been, aligned based on the requirements of the region. So you can see the on-road emissions, RDE, CF factors have been evolved based on the country requirement and country driving patterns. South Korea is also currently following Euro 6 for diesel and KLEV for gasoline. They also have defined CF factors for on-road emissions. India, you are aware that we started Bharat Stage 6 in 2020, and we also implemented on-road emissions during along with Bharat 6 in 2020. Till 2022, there was a monitoring phase for defining, collecting the data for PEMS-based measurement and defining the CFs. CFs have been defined, and CF implementation will happen from 2023. So CF is conformity of factors. And similar, the ASEAN region, some cases it's Euro 2, and some cases Euro 4 and Euro 6, different stages of emission regulations. This is also defined similar way for heavy duty applications. I would not like to go in details, but this gives an overview of the status of heavy duty engines, emission status in different countries and economies. Um, in case of motorcycles, India has taken a lead and are in adapting the stringent emission regulations because we have very large population of two-wheeler in country. We implemented Bharat Stage 4, which is equivalent to Euro 5, and we have also implemented World Motor Test Cycle and replaced the Indian driving cycles from in Indian regulations. This is the overview of other countries. The two-wheeler emissions is primarily important for countries like India, China, Thailand, mostly Asian countries, where predominant mode of transportation is two-wheelers. In developed countries like Europe, US, and Japan, two-wheelers are more at recreational vehicles. But here in developing countries like India, it's a primary mode of transportation for most of the people in the country. So this gives the evolution of various emission standards, how the HC, NOx, CO, and PM have been regulated from Euro 1 till Euro 4, and from Euro 5 to Euro 6, what kind of stringency has been adapted in reducing the tailpipe emissions for LCV vehicles. In terms of automotive trend technologies, you can see that motorcycle technology has always followed the passenger car. So because of the ease of adaptability in two-wheelers, once the technology is proven in passenger cars. So turbocharging, then secondary air injection, electronic fuel injection system, VVT, variable valve timing, and also three-way catalyst. So you can see that wherever MC is written, so this is motorcycle technology evolution, and where PC is written, it is passenger car technology development. So both development of new technology and improvement of efficiency of technology is being part and parcel of emission regulation reductions regime. So if we talk of diesel engines, the control strategies involved twofold. One is in-cylinder emission control, and other is after-treatment processes. So in cylinder, for example, for diesel, it includes fuel injection system improvement, air handling, and exhaust gas recirculation, while after-treatment processes include lean NOx trap, selective catalytic reduction, diesel oxidation catalyst, and also diesel particulate filters. For gasoline vehicles, technologies include in-cylinder emission of air fuel management and engine design improvement and exhaust gas circulation. And for after treatment, it is basically gasoline after treatment system, which is closed loop most of the time. For two-wheelers, it includes three-way cat, engine fine tuning, improvement in fuel injection system. So from carbureted engine to fuel injection system technology is something which has happened for two-wheelers in India with the implementation of BS6 norms. Evaporative emissions standards have been more stringent, so improvement in canister efficiency and OBD development. It's a very interesting chart for all of us to see that what has led to development of real-world driving emission cycles. So in 2011, JRC did a study wherein the study brought out that the gray cloud indicates the lab-based testing, whereas the dotted cloud indicates the testing, the emission regulations. Gray cloud is the, on-road measurements, and the regulatory is the dotted cloud. So during the study, it came out that while the lab-based testing ensures the compliance to the regulatory limit, but once these vehicles which are running on road, the engine out exhaust or tailpipe emissions are much beyond the exhaust limits, and hence this led to the formulation of a new testing methodology which is called real world driving emissions, and Europe started working on this and collecting data. So from 2011 to 15, they started developing a group which studied the what is the strategy, what kind of emission regulation, engine out emissions happen once the vehicles are running on road. So this led to a development of new emission system called portable emission measurement system. Although in US, PEBs have been used for a long time, in US EPA, they do in-service compliance using portable emission measurement system. In Europe, in 2016, the RD regulation was notified. It started with CF factor for NOx from 2.1, which was implemented from 17 for new vehicles and 2019 for new vehicles. And this CF was then made stringent again in 2020 and 20 for new vehicles and 2021 for old vehicles up to 1.5. This regulation is constantly evolving. The more the data gets collected, the more the clarity on the emissions and conformity factors are happening. So in 2018, the RD fourth package was notified, wherein the CF levels were reduced from 1.5 to 1.43, and it also included the validation evaluation criteria for hybrid vehicles, wherein there is a technology integration of electric motive power as well as the ICE. And GRC has carried out two more studies, in which there is an improvement in the PEMS equipment suggested, and which might lead to see a factor reduction of 1.3 to 1.23 respectively for NOx and PM. However, this is still not accepted by Europe. In India, 2016 was a very important year wherein we started deliberating on this issue of on-road emissions. This was basically due to the Dieselgate issue, which brought out globally the inefficacies of lab-based testing versus on real-world testing, and there were certain regulatory provisions created to ensure that defeat devices are not part of the vehicles anymore, and they part from form of the evaluation criteria. And industry were also directed to have a stricter conformance to on-road emissions. And 2016, ICAT was given the role of RD committee for India, wherein the mandate was to define the test protocol limits as well as the CF for India. So by 2021 September, we completed the study. The data collection happened in between. So this is the overall course of activities that happened. And by September 21, we submitted the CF values, which will be implemented from 2023 for the light duty vehicles. This is the methodology that has been adopted. So I would not like to get in details about it. We collected data for Indian roads, Indian temperature conditions, Indian altitude conditions, what kind of speed and accelerations the Indian vehicles are experiencing. And based on that, we developed our own Indian protocol. So over 60 vehicles were evaluated in different regions, north, west, and south. More than 10,000 kilometers of road tests were done, and over 50 experts were involved in this work for over 2 years. We also did a thorough analysis of efficacy of the portable emission measurement system in Indian scenario. So while collecting the data, doing the initial trials, we found that the PEMS equipment which have been developed by the equipment manufacturers are not suitable for Indian operations because of high ambient temperatures. So these modifications, these issues were highlighted during the study, and subsequently both Horiba and AVL have made improvements in improving and the functioning of these equipment in Indian road conditions. We have done the evaluation of both the PEMS equipment, lab evaluation, as well as on-road evaluation. We have established correlations also, and based on the data that has been collected on trip share, acceleration, and VPOS and our acceleration and aggressiveness of the driving, those parameters have been made available for the equipment manufacturers to modify their softwares, because their software was designed for European RDE cycle, and subsequently based on the Indian data they have modified the software for processing the data from Indian RDE methodology. So this is the different RD regulation for different category of vehicles which has been evolved during this exercise. So what kind of temperature ranges will be considered? So the category of vehicles included was M category, N1 and M1 and N1 low power vehicles. So India has a very unique category of vehicles which is called M1, N1 low power vehicles. So Tata Ace, Nano, or similar other small vehicles which are developed for last mile connectivity, also for passenger as well as commercial goods transportation. So these vehicles are very low powered vehicles, and their requirement for trip share and speed ranges were different from rest of the M and N1 category vehicles. So we defined the requirements for this class of vehicles also, and also defined the kind of trip shares we will have. The RD test cycle has urban, rural, and highway trip share. So the definition was phase one will be 34%, and I mean for urban driving cycle, for rural as well as the highway. While for M and N1 category, it was limited to only two phases. The speed restrictions was developed based on the speed restrictions we have for our Indian roads and the kind of vehicles we are running here. And trip duration is similar to what European cycle is, from 90 minutes to 120 minutes. So what kind of phases we have, what kind of stoppages are involved. So trip dynamics, whether it's in terms of relative positive acceleration or velocities. So this was evolved based on the data which we collected from on Indian roads and has become part of the Indian regulation. This is a comparison of RD programs for Europe, Japan, and India. So you can see that each country uh, tailors the RD protocol based on the vehicle mixes, the roads, the type of roads, the accelerations, the type of geographical condition of different altitudes and the temperature conditions that each country faces, and they define this based on the requirement of their local needs. CF, as I said, basically is that what is the emission limit in lab, and if we multiply with the conformity factor which is evolved, the RD test should conform to this particular multiplication factor. The limit in the lab, multiplication of conformity factor will give you the limit for the RDE test. So this is the CF factor for Europe, which has happened and evolved over a period of time. As I said, 2016, 2017, and 2018, they started with NOx from 2.1, then went up to 1.43. Then same for diesel and gasoline. For PN, they started with 1.5 from 2017, and gasoline direct injection vehicles also PN value is 1.5. So PN is regulated in RDE, not PM. So this is the references which have been taken in the study that I get undertook with the industry for evolving RD cycle. These are further details. These are certain data shares that has been collected. You can see the kind of, this is actual data that we collected from the vehicles in terms of NOx. So this is the CF value, how many vehicles are going beyond the CF value, and what is the compliance of other vehicles in this data study. So both for the urban part and her total urban specifically for PN also. So this is the overall summary that I can say that we have been able to successfully define and design in an RDE program taking into view the Indian conditions, Indian driving patterns, and the vehicle mixes. So as you see, that the emissions from automobiles is reducing drastically from what it was from Euro 0 level. In fact, many people say, as I think Sudhir said, breathing is killing. So some people say that, post Euro 6, the engine tailpipe emissions is much cleaner than the air that we breathe. And it is so because there is so much of reduction in all the pollutants in the tailpipe. In addition to these measures which have been taken to improve the tailpipe emissions of ICE vehicles, there are other measures taken by Indian government in reducing the emissions of air pollution from transportation. So the measures are that the sulfur levels in the fuels have been reduced drastically. There is absolutely no sulfur level is as good as what is in Europe. There is implementation of ethanol blending in gasoline. There is also a large focus on electrification of the transportation. So government has a FAME scheme wherein they are trying to promote implementation of electric vehicles. So electric vehicle, the localized emissions are reduced to a very substantial limit. But then, if we go from well to wheel, from the generation point to the end use point, the CO2 are much higher, but electric vehicles definitely prove cleaner option for localized emission issue. Sorry. While EVs are becoming very popular in certain commercial vehicle segment, I think in order to improve the fuel efficiency, there's a lot of hybridization happening in the passenger car segment. So we'll see that there are many mild hybrids and full hybrid vehicles being developed and launched by manufacturers. Hybrids give you an intermediate solution for electric mobility, because for electric mobility you need a very intensive distribution of EV charging infrastructure, and that cannot be created overnight. It will be developed during the course of time, and I'm sure it will be developed because there is a large focus from government on creating that infrastructure. However, need of reducing the emissions and also improving the fuel efficiency, the hybridization is a mode which is something which gives very immediate benefit and low hanging fruit benefit for the automotive sector, especially for passenger car segment. So in terms of emission reduction, the introduction of CNG in passenger car vehicles and also in buses has also reduced the localized emissions. There is a talk going on about hydrogen economy, green hydrogen and blue hydrogen. So that definitely is a long-term solution. And hydrogen is going to be the ultimate energy source for various requirements, both for power as well as for transportation. But that technology is still very nascent. It will take some time to have that technology maturity globally, and then also adaptability in India. I think with this, I would like to, also I would like to emphasize, since we're talking about clean air, government has also started an initiative called in-use vehicle emission testing, which is INC program. So government has a very large network of INC centers established in different states, certain INC centers were funded by central government, but state governments are also coming up with their own schemes of setting up inspection and certification centers. So those centers do assess and are a method and mean to test what is the engine or tailpipe emissions of in-use vehicles, because it is a known fact that in-use vehicles, because of poor maintenance and usage, abuse, uh, create are responsible for more than 80-90% of the emissions, air pollution. So that's the segment which is also being catered to and addressed by having a very large, extensive infrastructure to test such vehicles. So with this, I would like to end my presentation. Any questions I'll be taking up as and when it comes to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Tikku, for that very comprehensive insight into the regulatory, sort of sector, not just in India, but also globally. I would now like to invite Mr. K. Gandhi. Mr. Gandhi, of course, is a very well-known auto and fuel expert. Mr. Gandhi, your initial observations before we head to the Q&A session.
Thanks, Dipanshu, and good morning to everyone. It's indeed a great pleasure to be with experts and talking about how to catalyze the air quality. Well, it's very correct that what Sudhir said, that breathing is killing us. And therefore, as I have been associated with the Indian auto industry for more than 2 decades, I can say with pride that the Indian auto industry has been one of the most proactive and responsible industry in the country compared to many other industries in the country as such. It is quite evident that India has been able to implement Bharat Stage 6, which is Euro 6 equivalent, in 2020, way ahead of many countries, developing countries. Rather, it is I think the first developing country which has implemented Bharat Stage 6 emission norms. But having said that, I think it's time now we have to look the way forward, because if what we are breathing is killing us, and the auto industry, which is normally being said that it is a polluting industry, this is although that is a debatable point. So we have to now start looking ahead, and that's where I think we have to catalyze. And the Indian auto industry, in one of the papers which they submitted to the government, had mentioned that by 2047, which is 100 years of India's independence, we will have almost zero emission from the vehicles. Well, which is almost about 12 years behind Europe, because Europe has committed to have zero emissions by 2035, while India is talking about 2047. That's the Indian auto industry is talking about it. Now, the main question is how we have to manage the transition, that is these 20 years or 25 years, to how to manage the transition towards 2047 or zero emission vehicles. How do we manage the various emission norms, fuel efficiency norms, and the various fuels which are being currently talked about? Some of them were mentioned as hydrogen, electric mobility. We talk about flex fuel vehicles. We talk about methanol. We are talking about natural gas. We're talking about LNG. And there are a number of fuels which are being talked about. So we have to manage this transition from today to 2047, where we should have zero emission vehicles across the board, which is the most critical question. And that's where I think all the stakeholders have to get together to work out a policy. In our view, taking the consumer aspect also into account, we need a focused sector-wise roadmap. For example, ethanol blends may be good for maybe passenger vehicles. EV may be very good for two-wheelers and three-wheelers, which could be the first movers in that direction. LNG could be very good for heavy commercial vehicles, but that route would be best suited for them. So we have to balance the most efficient utilization of the resources as well as to see that the energy security requirement of the country is also met. Because today we are importing almost 80% of our crude. And today, I think all of us are fully aware how the Ukraine-Russian war has made the crude price shoot up to $120 per barrel. So therefore, energy security becomes very, very important from that angle. So what we need is a very, very balanced approach, a 360-degree approach, taking the consumer interest into account and with the goal of achieving zero emissions by 2047, and then to also see how the various pronouncements by the government on electric mobility, hydrogen economy, as well as flexi fuel vehicles are all addressed, keeping everything into account and the consumer interest of it. So these are my just initial thoughts on the subject.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gandhi. I mean, clearly, what is very clear is, of course, Mr. Pillai mentioned that right at the start, that breathing is killing. Now, a study also stated that at least 140 million people in India breathe air that is 10 times or more over the WHO safe limit. And 13 of the world's 20 cities with the highest annual levels of air pollution are in India. Now, this is despite measures adopted by successive governments. The air pollution situation continues to be alarming. So, from a short term to a long term perspective, if the panel can give us, throw some light in terms of what is the kind of approach that the country and all the various stakeholders that Mr. Gandhi also referred to, what is the kind of approach that needs to be taken, not just looking at 2047 when India wants to be zero, emitting zero emissions, but what should be the near term and the long term approach? Sudhir, maybe I can start with you.
Sure, Dipanshu. So I believe already Ms. Chikku and Mr. Gandhi have already spoken about it, but let me put that the way I look at it. We have already taken, when I say we, India has taken a lot of significant steps in responding to this air pollution as a problem. Government is already envisaging to kind of ambient air quality standards. They are kind of trying to revise that, strengthen the vehicular and the industrial pollution terms, the standards. Strong emphasis on renewable energy. Recently, in November 2021, in COP26, we pledged that we will source 50% of our energy from renewable sources, and we will be carbon neutral by 2070. And then the schemes like the Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, the LPG for millions of homes, which was distributed, and reducing indoor air pollution. And then the very impactful National Clean Air Program. I think those are the few steps for medium to long term. And I think the immediate and the most important step was from a giant leap from BS4 to BS6 by the government. And the best part is the timely implementation of BS6 standards by the government and the industry, which shows the commitment towards the concern of air pollution in India. So those are my thoughts around what we have been doing in the short term to medium to long term.
Right. Ms. Tikku, a question on India's approach to emission control. Of course, you have sort of spoken about the various regulatory aspects. But what needs to, if you talk about this whole transition, right, from ICE to EVs, and then we're also talking about multiple options in the future. So when we look at this whole transition for the future, do you think there's a need for a change in the approach that we're taking as a country or as an industry?
Dipanshu, yes, of course, there is a need because we cannot blindly follow what others are doing. We have to take a stock of the situation that as a country, what are our key resources should we develop our transportation or energy policies based on the import energy solutions, or we should have something which is locally and we have self-reliance in that and which is sustainable? So that is something wherein we need to concentrate, wherein we have to address self-reliance, sustainability, local solutions, less dependence on import, and reducing the emissions at the same time. So cleaner technologies should be used. So the kind of initiative government has taken in solar initiative, it has really enhanced the power requirement and improved the power requirement in the country. So similarly, for other energy solutions also, we should look at local sources, local availability of those resources, not have dependency on imports. So, for example, EVs. It's a good initiative, but we are importing all cells from predominantly from China. So we are shifting our energy dependency from Gulf to China or similar economies. So that's something wherein we should really have a careful thought on that.
Mr. Gandhi, I also wanted to understand, as an industry, our thoughts on non-exhaust emissions, or how is India really approaching that? One is, of course, emissions from the exhaust gas emissions. The other one is the non-exhaust emissions. How are we looking at tackling that?
I think what you're basically talking about is the particulate emissions from tires.
Tax, yeah.
See, so far I don't see there's any regulation on that. Although we are now have worked on a regulation for rolling resistance regulation, which is coming up. So we would have fuel efficiency. It will be, but it's more for meeting the fuel efficiency regulation than the particulate. But having said that, yes, we need to look into it because our roads are getting better, the speeds are increasing, and we have more concretized roads coming up. So which means that there will be more wear and tear of the tires taking place compared to the earlier situation, and one needs to look at that. But having said that, I think we currently need to more concentrate on the tailpipe emissions than looking into the tire part of it. Okay. Because still a lot of retreaded tires, particularly in the commercial vehicle segments, are being used as such. And coming back to my earlier thing, that if you look at the tailpipe emissions, I think it's high time that we come up with a PLI scheme for incentivizing zero emission technologies. I'm not trying to mention any technology per se here, because as Pamela said, if you talk about EV, then we are shifting our imports from petroleum crude to critical metals, which are controlled by other countries as such. So therefore, the PLI scheme should be there, which should be technology neutral, fuel neutral, and should incentivize zero emission technologies as such, which could be based on hydrogen, which could be based on any other fuel combination. Other thing is that we need to immediately mandate in the urban areas, particularly if we want to talk about three-wheelers, they could be zero emission three-wheelers mandated for urban areas. And that's not a big, because the models are available, the technologies are there, and that can be easily mandated. So we need to have a city-wise or region-wise specific approach in this matter.
Right, right. Talking of technologies, Mr. Pillai, how is Corning contributing towards, to mitigating air pollution in India? In terms of solutions, what can India expect from Corning in the near term?
Dipanshu, we have been purposefully inventing products to contribute towards cleaner environment for last, I think, 5 decades now. And our first foray into environmental clean air technologies began in sometime in 1970s, when we invented the cellular ceramic substrate for automakers in US to meet the Clean Air Act regulations. And you all know that today we manufacture ceramic substrates and particulate filters that are core to the world-class emission control systems for light duty to heavy duty to construction equipments. And over the last 5 decades, we must have invested more than $2 billion and hold about 1,000 patents to serve the environmental technology needs. And in the short term, what we are trying to do is we are trying to get for India specific, we have kind of increased the our portfolio size, and we have customized product for Indian OEM needs and now shipping them to India. I'm proud that with doing all those things, we have kind of prevented 4 billion tons of hydrocarbons and 4 billion tons of nitrogen oxide, 40 billion tons of carbon monoxides to be released in the environment and make the sky that we share as the dumping grounds. And since 2006, our particulate filters have kind of trapped or captured about more than 1 million tons of particulate at the vehicle exhaust. So we are consistently innovating cutting edge products to for the commitment that we have given to the cleaner environment, Dipanshu.
Okay.
Both globally
All right.
and in India.
Thank you, Mr. Pillai. With the limited time that we have left, I'm also going to take a couple of questions from our participating delegates. Satish KG wants to know, he says, though a step forward, EV introduction is a starter, but for a country like India, there are positives as well as negatives. Will this be enough, or what all should be done in parallel to attain the goal? So largely his question is, towards a cleaner future, EVs, I think our panelists have already alluded to this fact that are EVs going to be enough, or what other solutions should the industry look at? That his question is. Mr. Gandhi, would you like to take that up?
See, as I had mentioned that industry has always been saying that you give us the regulation and we'll find the technology for meeting it. So basically, we would like to, the government should immediately initiate, and I think the steps have already been started as I'm part of one of those group, where we have started talking about Bharat 7 and CAFE 3, and also fuel efficiency regulations for two-wheelers. So these steps, I think we have to have a time-targeted mandate for meeting Bharat 7, CAFE 3, and two-wheeler fuel efficiency regulation, which will automatically drive the right technology and the fuel combination, and will make the environment clean, and also we would be having the right technology combinations in the market. For example, if you're on the fuel efficiency regulation, if you want to have, say 90% zero emission vehicles, you could bring down the regulation of CO2 for two-wheelers to down to say 10 grams CO2, which will automatically, if you look at the current scenarios, it will almost drive the whole 90% of the auto industry to zero emission vehicles. So we have to use the levels the emission and fuel efficiency regulation to drive the technology. And let's not get into whether it will be hydrogen, it will be hybrid, or it will be strong hybrid, or it will be EV. The industry will take care of it, and the market forces will decide.
Right. Ms. Tikku, there's a question for you. Mr. Dhimati, he says, how is the PUC certification adding value to clean air in India? It's checked at the engine idling condition, which is less than 10% of Indian driving cycle. It's just reporting of findings and no corrective measures are taken. What's your comment on that?
I don't disagree with him, but it's like if somebody is having a fever, so thermometer you put in and you indicate that there is a fever, or your pulse gives you a indication that you are running a fever. So it's something like that. It's a diagnostic tool to identify whether the vehicle engine is working properly or it is emitting more. It cannot replace the full, chassis dynamometer testing, but it's an indicative tool to identify whether if the engine is polluting or not. How it is happening? So in commercial vehicles, basically, you have to have annual fitness check done. Okay. So unless and until you have a fitness certificate, you cannot get your renewals done in case of commercial vehicles. So there it is, addressing that issue of, how this tool can help improving the vehicle. So if it is not passing, then they have to go for maintenance, and then again come back for fitness. While for personal vehicle, for passenger vehicles, this regulation is not mandated yet, but there is a thought process of bringing the personal vehicle also under the mandate of inspection and certification regime. Again, there it will be only a tool to identify gross polluters. It cannot quantify the pollution. Yeah. I
I
hope
think
I've
one,
answered.
Just like to add some more to what Pamela has said.
right.
Actually, if you see the correlation of mass emissions and the idle CO emission, the correlation is very good when you have a CO emissions at idle and at mass emission. Therefore, it's a very good indicator of the pollution of the vehicle from the vehicle.
Hmm. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ku and Mr. Gandhi. I'll take one more question from one of our delegates. It says a majority of two-wheelers have been left out of the purview of regulation as the PM limit is not applicable to MPFI engines. Also, there is no PM limit for the two-wheelers yet. Is it not high time to implement a fuel and engine technology neutral for two-wheelers? Mr. Ku, would you like to take that?
Yeah, I think two-wheelers are predominantly gasoline vehicles. So gasoline vehicles, even if when they are multi-point fuel injection system, the PM is actually not there. But once the gasoline vehicles go to direct injection mode, then the PM is an issue. So I am not aware whether the two-wheeler industry has moved from carbureted engine to directly to direct injection system. So I hope this answers. Maybe Mr. Gandhi can add something to it.
Yeah, I think Pamela is very right in that. Currently, of course, Bharat 6, most of the vehicle two-wheeler manufacturers are using fuel injection systems. They have moved away from carburation as such, but they have not reached the stage where it will be direct fuel injection into the combustion chamber. So, but at that stage, even then the PM would come into play. I'm sure that when we have March 7, we'll be having this regulation in place at that time.
Okay. We're completely running out of time on this session, but I would like to have one final question, and I would like all our panelists to sort of comment on it. That would be essentially what kind of collaborations, we have, of course, different stakeholders in this panel today. What kind of collaborations would be needed to ensure that India meets the carbon neutrality targets that we have set as a country? Mr. Pillai, I would start off with you.
I would say, I'll just say that in one line, is that looking at this problem holistically as air pollution. Because as an industry, the auto industry, we have kind of been doing all the right things. And we see with the next 2 decades of ICE powered vehicles, the automobile industry is looking at this as contributing towards cleaner environment by adopting the next generation emission controls. So just pointing at just one industry or one source of pollution is not going to really help us. Looking at this problem holistically is going to solve this problem for India.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Gandhi, your final comments on this?
I think I would agree with it. What I feel is that to have a collaboration with all the stakeholders, I'm only referring to the auto sector as such.
Sure.
I think we need to immediately form a third auto fuel policy committee, which will have all the stakeholders right from the energy suppliers to the technology suppliers to the vehicle manufacturers to the consumers. And so we should come up with that auto fuel policy, which will give a collaborative effort towards zero emission.
Thank you, Mr. Gandhi. Another policy that will ensure that we are prepared for the future. Ms. Tikku, your final comments on this session today.
Yeah, I actually agree to what both Sudhir and Mr. Gandhi has said. We need to have an integrated approach for reducing the air pollution, not only at what is the in pollution out of vehicles, but also what are the different sources which are contributing to air pollution. For example, in Delhi, October onwards we start choking. Okay.
Yep.
So the stubble burning and burning of waste and those are big issues. And they are big health hazard. While we try to regulate and tighten the emission regulation for automotive sector, and they are putting billions of dollars in developing those technologies, but is it giving the real benefit if your other large problem, 99% of problem is something which is not being addressed, which is causing the real air pollution? So
Right.
that's something which needs to be well thought of. I mean, investing in new technology and that auto industry is doing, but is it giving you the right benefit? Because your uncontrolled, unregulated part of economy or your ecosystem is a major contributor to this issue.
That's right. That's
we
right.
need to
Indeed.
have we need to have a comprehensive air pollution, air quality task force to address each of these puzzles or contributors, building blocks which will lead to the ultimately cleaning of air, whether it is agricultural waste or it is your waste from your municipal waste, which is also causing. You can see in Delhi we have Najafgarh drain, and if anybody passes through, you can breathe the methane, which is going directly into the air, and it's not only causing air pollution, it's also leading to greenhouse gas emissions and also ozone depletion. So these are very big issues for large cities and metro cities, which should form a comprehensive plan of government in addressing air quality.
Indeed, Ms. Tikku. Yes.
I think, sir, future of the mankind seems to be in the air. After hearing all these comments from the co-panelist.
Indeed, Mr. Pillai, and like Ms. Tikku said, Ms. Tikku, probably you are at the position, right platform to take these initiatives, getting all stakeholders, in ensuring that such a task force is indeed created. And hopefully, when we discuss this subject again in the near term, we would have more interesting perspectives and some more concrete decisions in this regard. Thank you for being such a wonderful panel. Yes, Mr.
I think Mobility Outlook has a role to play in advocacy, and that you can do through the wide spread information dissemination on this pandemic. Create is, as Sudhir has rightly termed it, as global pandemic of breathing air.
Right. Now, I assure you, we would play our role constructively, and with your support, we will certainly do that. And thank you very much. And I appreciate you taking time and sharing your perspectives and knowledge with all of us today. I truly appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you.